1-800-Flowers.com. So a few years back, um, I became the head of marketing at a company called 1-800-Flowers.com. It used to be called 1-800-Flowers, and the reason it was so successful was the phone number was the brand name. And the guy who didn't start the company, but he bought the name of the company. He had operated a couple of floral shops in Queens and the New York area. His name was Jim McCann, and he started getting orders from 1-800-Flowers, and then they stopped, and he went to Texas in pursuit of, what is this company doing? And they were failing. They had spent too much money on fancy headquarters and other things. And he managed to leverage himself, and he bought the phone number, basically bought the company, and was one of the first online retailers, by the way. Very smart outfit. Now, I had met Jim McCann when I was working for a company called Gannett Outdoor. Gannett, you may know best as the publisher of USA Today, but they're now one of the largest broadcasters. They own a lot of TV stations. They're also the largest newspaper company, but at the time they owned one of the two largest out-of-home advertising companies in the U.S., Gannett Outdoor, and I ran business development there for 10 years. And I met Jim McCann as part of my efforts in business development, and we got to be friends, and he ended up hiring me to run marketing. At the time I was hired, the company was 1 year away from going public. It was still a private company. They were, at the time, had decided strategically, even though they had an online business that was growing, to push retail flower shops and their flower expertise. And the ad agency at the time, an agency called Kirschenbaum and Bond, which I'm not sure even exists anymore, had advised them that this was the strategic way to go. And so before I came in, I was working with 800-Flowers, actually buying outdoor advertising for them and managing it for them as a consultant. And I remember I had a meeting with the VP marketing. He was a guy they had hired from the record business. He had a ponytail and seemed like a really cool, mysterious, magical dude. I waited an hour in the lobby for an appointment with him. He was an hour late. He ended up being hired by GeoCities, which is an early .com company, and he made millions of dollars when Mark Cuban bought GeoCities. And Mark Cuban, you may know, is the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. I think he's on this investment TV show I can't think of the name of now, where people sit around and decide whether to fund people's ideas. So, again, 800-Flowers was an online retail pioneer. When I came on board, the VP marketing, as I say, he had left, so the spot was open. And Kirschenbaum and Bond had just spent $1 million shooting beautiful flowers in Holland and Africa and South America. The agency all got to fly to Africa and go on safaris and all kinds of stuff. And the advertising was really beautiful, showed the flowers and the floral expertise, but when they went on the air, the phones didn't ring, and they didn't ring because they weren't direct response ads. They were branding ads, image ads with a little, call 1-800-Flowers at the end. So the players at the time, as I said, Jim McCann ran the company. Chris McCann, his younger brother, kind of chief operating officer, and managed a lot of the operations. Their sister Julie McCann was style director, designed bouquets and things like that. I hired a guy named Don Staley to help me when I came in to run marketing. And Don Staley was the creative force behind a catalog company called J. Peterman. And if you ever watch Seinfeld, I think one of the characters works for J. Peterman. It was pretty amazing. Mostly because of the writing and the product choice. Anyway, I ended up firing Kirschenbaum and Bond, talking to John Bond, firing them, which wasn't very pleasant. I hired a little agency called Padone and Partners, where I thought we'd be a pretty big fish in a small pond, and they did a good job for us. we changed our focus. And I am going to put in the ad for you guys to look at. Going to talk about kind of what we learned overall, what happened, and when we changed focus and what we learned. So there's an example of the J. Peterman. If you take just a second, everyone, to read the copy here, it's remarkable. And this guy, Don Staley, wrote the copy. Just take a second and look at that. Cream smock dress, vintage silhouette, and a slinky mixture of 65% cotton and 35% silk. Needs only a dash of black velvet to set it apart. But what a dash. Just brilliant, brilliant writer. Okay, so that was the agenda. Now to start to spell things out and how we used research. So rather than focusing on flowers, and 800flowers.com was, of course, already doing this. When you call to place an order at 1-800flowers.com and they tell you, would you like to buy some candy or nuts to go with that? You're not likely to want to do it because, first of all, you haven't seen the candy or nuts. You don't know what they are, whether they're any good, how many you get, anything else. But with the internet, all of a sudden you have the ability to introduce line extensions, other product lines, other kinds of gift ideas. So one of the first early research questions we had to face was how far could we go with once we decided that the strategic focus from then on, from my starting in marketing, was going to be a variety of products. In other words, we have real product news for you now. Not just we have beautiful flowers from Holland, no, but you can get food and sweets and plush toys. So all of a sudden, we had real product news. That's the thing to advertise. And that's what we decided. But then the question arose, how far can we go with this, more products to sell? How big is the 1-800flowers.com umbrella? What will our customers buy from us? And the management of the company, particularly Jim McCann, was very interested in getting into gardening and lawn supplies and challenging, the burpees and, other gardening. Garden.com, I think, existed at that point. So could we sell those kinds of things, since we were 1-800flowers.com after all, which is obviously flowers, a plant. However, when I looked into past research, which was hard to find, I had to go search through files since no one kept a fact book. No one kept a file folder of all the research studies and et cetera. I found a very big sort of a brand survey that interviewed users at 1-800flowers.com as to what their hobbies were, and gardening was very low. Why? Because the buyers at 1-800flowers.com, the customers, tend to be urban, working people who are busy, too busy to shop for presents, too busy to remember they should shop for presents. So they could always go to 1-800flowers.com at the last minute and get a nice, thoughtful present. So, in fact, the research, which I had to dig to find, told us, because we had asked questions of our customer base about what they like to do, we had facts to say that extending the product line to gardening and lawn supplies would not be a good idea. So, Jim McCann, a little background on Jim. His father was a house painting contractor. He grew up in Queens. Started with one flower shop and more, and as I said before, he bought 1-800flowers mainly for the phone number. And he, rather than the company that had failed, that spent too much money on advertising and big headquarters and staff, he was very careful with his money, and he did his best to make pay-per-order deals with major media companies so that they would run his TV commercials, and he wouldn't pay them for the media. He would pay them only if they generated orders, which is basically the media company taking all the risk on the transaction. And as Turner and some other cable companies were just starting up, they were willing to take that kind of business. And then, interestingly, the first Iraq War, when we had to get Saddam Hussein out of, I think it was Kuwait at the time, made the ratings for CNN go way up. And so he got much more viewership and was very good for the company. He was also a web pioneer. So the face of the company, was in all the ads. They went public with Goldman Sachs in 2000. And by the way, Jim now owns 4% of the New York Mets, among other things. Chris, again, is his brother, key operational executive, brilliant, gets things done. He really is amazing. And he was an undercover boss, I understand. Don Staley, we talked about. He created and wrote J. Peterman. I paid him $25,000 a month as a creative consultant. A lot of money in those days. This was the early 90s. A lot of money in there, or rather late 90s, excuse me. A lot of money in any day. So Julie McCann we talked about, and there's Jim McCann, there's Chris McCann. I'm just trying to sort of tell you this little story here. Okay, so these are the steps we took to change the direction of the business. No more retail focus on flower shops, focus on online. No more floral focus, come at the consumer with real product news. And the line we came up with was flowers are just the beginning. That was the selling idea, to try to let people know that we had more than flowers. I pulled together cross-functional teams from every part of the company to plan every holiday. Cross-functional meaning people from the call center, people from online, people from product development, obviously marketing people. And we all got sat down well in advance of every major holiday and started to talk about it. What day of the week was it falling on? What was the merchandise we had for it? What were we going to do to maximize it? How were we going to get new customers? No more branding ads. Ads were expected to generate sales. They had offers and calls to action. We even bought our media based on paper order or very cheap direct response media. I called meetings every week. I call them the war meetings, where we would go over in detail exactly what we sold that week, whether we were on track or off track, and whether we needed to do anything to get ourselves back on track. I also hired Peppers and Rogers Consulting. I had an old friend named Don Peppers, I'd known from agency days, who was very well known, if you Google him, as kind of the founder of one-to-one marketing. At least he claims credit for it. I hired his consulting firm, which he had at the time, to try to bring us to one-to-one marketing and most valuable customer-based marketing. So those are all the things we did. A lot of change was driven very fast, by the way, somewhat risky, frankly, for me. But I worked with my team and key people all over the company. I did not organizationally spend enough time bringing Jim McCann, whose company this was, into the fold. I kind of ran a lot of this stuff on my own, and in retrospect, not a good idea. And I just mentioned that as another sort of job tip to you guys. You need to manage up as well as you manage down. And so what do we know about the customer? Again, lots of primary research, but I had to find it in files because it was not pulled together anywhere. We developed a new Tabasco, which I got management to agree to, and then the agency agreed to it. We had to pull together ads for the holidays, the Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, etc. holidays. We had different 800 numbers based on whatever media channel it ran on, so we could track responses. And we gave people 10% off if they mentioned code different for each cable network. We did a recall test of the advertising where we showed it to people embedded in some programming, and then asked them pre and post the programming what they thought of 800 Flowers, what they remembered from the ad, and it did very well. They got the message that we had widened our product base because we showed in the ad the food, the candles, the other things we offered. It was a big visual point. So we had gone public again before this fourth quarter thing. I was the one who planned the marketing budget, over $20 million, and it worked. We made our quarterly numbers as we promised to Wall Street. We set up regular annual, we called it omnibus research,